We're living in exciting times, aren't we? I mean, think about the kinds of things that we can do. We can watch the news 24 hours a day. I remember when BBC News 24, the channel that's like spewing out news all day long was launched. And it's like any time of the day you can get the BBC's view on things. That was incredible at the time. We can connect with people all over the world at any time via a number of different means. We can work from home. And some of us do, and we can still stay connected with our colleagues. We can answer work-related queries any time of the day. We can have work calls forwarded to our mobiles when we go on holiday. Yeah, you can see where I'm going with this. Think of all the work that we can do now. We can be far more productive than any of the people in the past ever were. The problem is, it's actually making us ill. There's research out there that says because we may never switch off and we may never downshift, that there is quite a high rate of stress and high rate of illness in the working population. And I think that carries over into all populations. And one of the defining features of these blue zones that I've spoken about is that the people who live there, they know how to switch off. Not just the older folk, and you're thinking maybe it's because they're 106 and they haven't got a mobile phone. Well, no, they haven't, a lot of them. But ingrained in their culture is a rhythm that allows them to release stress and to switch off when it matters. And when Jesus spoke the words that we just heard Terry read to us, he was looking out on people who were burdened and who felt under pressure. Perhaps not in the same way as some of us do, but still a people who felt under a burden. They were overburdened by the expectations of the religious leaders who said, you've got to do this and this and this, and you're not allowed to do this. And if you've got to follow all these rules, and if you follow them all, you may just have a chance of making it in God's eyes. They were also burdened by cares, just like the rest of us. Every generation is burdened by perhaps the same sort of cares. We might express them differently, but we still feel the same burdens as our parents and our grandparents. And they were probably, some of them, overstressed by work. Different work than we do, yes, but still feeling the burden. And what did Jesus do? Did he say, don't worry, come to me and you won't have a burden? No, he didn't say that. What he offered them was a different kind of burden. He offered them a light burden, one that they could easily bear, one that they could carry and still flourish. He didn't offer them a way out of life which meant you will never have any cares, but he offered them a burden that they would be willing and able to bear. I think the burden he was offering was the burden of following him, the burden of learning from him, and through him, knowing God the Father. And this is a burden because it involves us having to do things. It involves us making commitments. It's not an easy option, but it is an option which we can bear, and more than that, which we can flourish under. But Jesus also offered them rest. You will find rest. I don't know how many religious leaders of the time said, come to me, follow all these rules and regulations. Man, you're going to have such a relaxing time. Jesus says, come to me, you who are burdened. My burden's light, and you will find rest. Not just the eternal rest of heaven, but rest here and now in our own lives. But let's go back to the blue zones. While studying the people of Sardinia, Dan asked a 107-year-old woman if she had any advice for younger people. Yes, she said. And it's quite an ironic piece of advice. Life is short. Don't run so fast that you miss it. So this morning I want to ask, are we running so fast that we are missing out on the fullness of life that Jesus promised us? Dan also spoke with a shepherd. I call him Dan, it's like I know him. I don't know him, it's just his surname's really difficult to pronounce. So I'm going to stick with Dan, okay? It's not that difficult, but if you pronounce it wrong, it sounds a bit funny. While studying the people of Sardinia, not Sardinia, this is, yes, it's still in Sardinia. He's still in Sardinia. What great destinations this guy goes to. He meets a shepherd, and this shepherd's almost 80. And every day, he would wake up at 4 a.m. in the morning, and he would have breakfast, and then he would walk 5 miles uphill. And not just like a gentle uphill, like a really steep uphill, to tend his flock, to look after the sheep. And on the way, he would stop, and he would stop at the same point on that journey every day, and he would just look at the view. He would just appreciate the view that he'd probably known for almost 80 years. He'd lived nowhere else, but he would stop, and he would soak it in. He wasn't rushing so that life passed him by. I want to talk a little bit about what Jesus talked about when he referred to a yoke, and I think we can move to a nice image of a yoke. Because I had no idea what a yoke looked like. This is a lady using a yoke. What is a yoke? Well, a yoke helps people to carry loads. So she's got this across her shoulders, which means she can now carry a greater weight. Following Jesus doesn't mean you'll never have any burdens, and some of them will be pretty heavy because life's like that. And actually following Jesus can make life sometimes more difficult. But Jesus says his yoke will be light. That thing that we bear across our shoulders in order to take the weight will not feel heavy, but will feel lighter than if we didn't have Jesus in our lives. There will be burdens that you can bear. And more than that, they are from a master who is good to us and who offers us rest and who offers us peace. So this morning I want to think about us cultivating a rhythm of rest. Now this doesn't mean being lazy, because my friend Dan, when he was interviewing hundreds of people who lived over 100 years old, he found that every single one of them, there were no exceptions, every single one of them worked hard during their lives. And some of them were still working hard at 100. There was one lady who would she would get a machete out, this is in Costa Rica, and she would clear her garden. She was over 100 years old. I think she would have a bit of a rest in the afternoon, but she was out there just clearing it, making sure everything was tidy. But their cultures had an inbuilt rhythm of rest. Whether it was the afternoon nap, that's a good one that people would often use. Or they would gather in the streets to chat with people. Or they would have regular meetings with neighbors. In Okinawa, there was a lady of over 100, and every afternoon at 3:30, her friends and neighbors would gather, and they would laugh, and they would talk. And what that allowed them to do was to support each other, to connect with each other. And statistics prove that if you have small groups of people who look out for you, you're likely to live longer. That's a simple fact. Quite simply, people who live long and healthy lives seem to be able to deal with stress, seem to be able to hold things lightly. It doesn't mean they don't care about things, but they just don't let things dominate them because they have a longer view of life. And I believe that God wants that for us. I believe God wants us to live fulfilled lives. And part of that means finding a rhythm of rest. And I want to give you some suggestions this morning. So let's move to the first suggestion. Switch off. Now, some of you are going to need counseling after this, okay? That's the prayer team will be here at the front, and they can pray about important things, and they can pray about your mobile phone usage. But seriously, staying constantly connected via mobile, tablet, or whatever, can actually make it hard for us to switch off. And I'm speaking from personal experience. You check your emails, for instance, for those of us who check them. We check them, say before we go to bed, or you check your messages before you go to bed. And sometimes you can spend the night worrying about that message, and suddenly you've lost your peace, and you've lost your sleep. And the fact is you can't do anything about a lot of what comes in, certainly not overnight. but we still want to be connected. We still want to know what's going on. I was at a day on Thursday, a newly accredited Ministers' Day, and that basically means people like me who've just come out of college and are ministers have a period of 3 years where they have to follow a program of study and meeting up and learning from other ministers so that we can have a long and sustainable, basically a long and sustainable ministry. And what we were talking about was time management. And the guy there was talking about technology. And it was interesting listening to all these ministers and how they tried to deal with the fact that nowadays the phone may not ring as often, but the emails and the messages there are round the clock for a lot of people. And what I was finding, and this is just my own personal experience, is that I was going to bed after checking emails or doing some work or reading something on the tablet, and I was finding it really difficult to sleep. Now, this isn't a lesson in I'm not life coaching you here this morning, but I just want to help you if you're in a situation like I have been, which is you get a constant flow of information. I've started to develop a bedtime routine because I take my kids through it. And if you've got young children, you take them through a bedtime routine, and hopefully most of the time they follow that, and most of the time they'll be asleep at the time you want, so you can watch your soap operas, or you can do your gardening, or you can just, you take them through a bedtime routine. Adults need that as well. If we have just random things happening before we go to bed, the chances are we'll not sleep well. Our rest will be disturbed, and that can actually make us unhealthy. So my goal these days, it just gives you an insight into my maturity, not my mental maturity, but the fact that I'm getting to that age about slippers and cocoa. I have quiet... Not yet, I've got Crocs, but slippers are coming. It's not that funny, is it? Quiet hours, okay, quiet hours, back to it, Rob. I try not to access the internet or emails after about 9:30 at night. I try and read a book that has nothing to do with what I've been thinking about during the day. I try and build in a rhythm that allows me to switch off. And there are reasons for that. These things give out blue light, which actually limit the release of hormones, which enable us to go to sleep quickly. So there's scientific evidence, but there's also the idea of, hang about, there should be a time where we switch off. There should be a time where we rest. There should be a time where we just wind down. And people have been doing it for generations, but my generation, because of this connectedness, is losing sight of the fact we've got to be able to learn how to switch off. See, technology is not bad at all. It's not bad, it's neutral. It's your relationship with it that matters. And what's that got to do with Jesus? Well, I think Jesus wants us to be attentive to what's going on around us and to be present with people. And often these kind of things, for me personally, can make me less present if I'm constantly thinking about what I'm doing when I'm chatting with you and I'm just double-checking my calendar while I'm visiting you. That makes me less attentive, and it's really important. Not only that we switch off, but that we recognize how important it is to be present with people. So that's the first thing, learning how to switch off, and that will vary for each of us. There's no common denominator with that. The second is this. Oh, look at that. If in doubt, picture, that's Rob on a Saturday afternoon. Work hard, but rest well. There was a time when Jesus was working hard. In fact, he worked hard for most of his life. He was healing the sick, and he was speaking to people all around him, and he was calling people to follow him. He'd been calling people saying, if you want to be my disciple, you've got to do this, and you've got to leave behind some things in order to follow me. And after all this, he was tired, and he needed to get across a lake. So he boarded a boat along with some of his followers. And here's the story. He got into a boat, and his disciples followed him. Suddenly a furious storm came up on the lake, so the waves swept over the boat. But Jesus was sleeping. The disciples went and woke him, saying, "Lord, save us, we're going to drown." He replied, "You have little faith. Why are you so afraid?" Then he got up and rebuked the wind and the waves, and it was completely calm. The men were amazed and asked, "What kind of man is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him." You know, there's an awful lot in this episode of Jesus calming the storm. But let's think about it from our perspective this morning of Downshift. He'd just called a load of people to follow him. He'd healed lots of people. And now he was in the boat with his disciples. Man, that is quality time where he can tell his disciples things, where he can teach them. They're away from the crowds. This is the time where he could, you know what it's like, you're on a car journey with someone. You've got a captive audience. Use that time to tell them incredible truths about God, to pray for them, to heal his own followers of things that they need healing from. And after all, they've been working hard looking after the boat, so they need some help from Jesus. And what does he do? He has a nap. He's in the back of the boat taking what they call in certain parts of the world a kip. He's having a rest. The disciples are working hard at looking after this boat, and Jesus is asleep. Now, it might not be the most important thing in this story, but for us this morning, it's important to recognize Jesus took time to rest. And he did this even when others weren't. He didn't follow the disciples' lead and think, I've got to be present with them because they're working hard, so should I. He knew that he should rest. And he did, even in the middle of a storm. Now, it all worked out okay. But that's a lesson for us. The master, the one who was most connected to God out of anyone on this planet, the one who was more compassionate about the lost than any of us put together, still had a rest, even when those around him weren't. You know, our desire to work all the hours that God sends us might help us to become wealthy, but it might not make us healthy. And for some of us, we might not have this opportunity. We might be working in environments or living in environments where we do not have the time to say, great, I'll take a nap, hold the phone, I'm having some down. Do you know there's something called the NASA nap? I'll tell you this, the NASA nap. NASA worked out that 26 minutes is the ideal time for their astronauts to take a rest, to have a nap. Some of us may not have time for a NASA nap during our working lives or our day-to-day lives. Do you know, I think that some people are far more busy retired than they are working. I haven't told my dad that yet. He's just retired, but I'll find out. But for any of us, we may not have an opportunity to take a NASA nap. But we need to be able to protect our free time. We need to make sure that it's just that it's free, that it doesn't get filled up with things which steal our peace and which steal our rest, and which steal this incredible gift of being able to take it easy. You know, if you let work or if you let stress eat into the free time of your life, you will suffer. That is a fact. And God wants us to be as healthy as possible for as long as possible. That, I'm sure, is God's whole idea for mankind, to be healthy emotionally, spiritually, physically, in all those ways. So resting well for some of us might mean taking breaks, working hard, but taking breaks, not just working all the way through. Especially if we're creative people. If we're doing creative things, taking breaks is really important because you can get stifled in the work that you do. Another thing is guarding your free time. Bill Hybels, when he was a young minister, he found that he could be out every night of the week as well as working every day. Bill Hybels is now in charge of a church of tens of thousands of people in America. But when he was a young minister, he realized he could be out every night of the week. And he had a young family. So he made a commitment, and he told his leaders this. His commitment was, for most weeks, he was going to be in of an evening, 4 evenings a week. And he said, that is how I'm going to work. And I'm going to do that because this phase of my life requires me to be present with my family. And if I am present with my family, I am going to be healthy, this church will be healthy, and it sets a good example. So he did that early on in his life. And that meant him saying no to things. And that's going to be hard. You know, the hardest thing is often saying no to really, really good opportunities. But this man who I appreciate greatly, and to be honest, he's on the side of the workaholic. He's closer to a workaholic than I will ever be, and yet he was prepared to say, time out at this stage in my life. It changed as his children got older and as life moved on. He was more flexible, but he said, this time I will guard my free time. It also means, resting well means educating those around you who depend on you, that there might be times where perhaps they shouldn't depend on you as much in order to allow you to be depended on at other times. And that is difficult. But there's also something which is a gift, a real gift, and that's the idea of Sabbath. That's the idea of what God set out from the very beginning, that day of rest. And we're not going to go into detail about that this morning. Tonight, we're going to look at what Sabbath means for Christians and for people who want to learn how to rest well. I just want to sum up this morning before we move to share at the Lord's table. You know I'm blessed. I've got an amazing family. I'm in an amazing church. I'm in a beautiful part of the world. Whenever we go away from here, we always come back and think, wow, isn't this beautiful? And I want the things I do to last, and the people I meet and those relationships to matter. But I've come to realize that to build something sustainable, to work towards something long-term and not just a burst of energy, we have to take care of ourselves. And we have to take care of those we love, because that is what will sustain us for the long term. We need to follow Jesus' advice, not to take on anyone else's burden except the one Jesus offers us, the light burden of following him, which can be tough, which can be hard, which can be challenging, but ultimately will bring rest, both in this life, when you sense what God's peace really means, and in the life that is to come. But in order to do this, some of us really need to downshift.